All right, welcome to the Practice Builder podcast, where we talk with implementers about the real struggles and wins that are happening with building a practice. And the way that I see it, as someone who's newer to the community, which is about 900 strong, is that there are a couple elements of building a successful EOS implementer practice. One, of course, you want to attract and retain excellent clients, people that you're helping get closer to what they want from their business. You also want to be delivering excellence within the session room. And lastly, you want to be building your version of the EOS life. So today I'm joined by my friend, expert implementer, Dan Wallace, and we're going to jump into building and rebuilding practices. One stat that's interesting is that I've heard recently that 43% of implementers say that winning clients is their hardest challenge. And Dan, you have said that you've built your practice not once, not twice, but 3 times. Is that correct?
That's true.
Wow. Okay. Tell me what happened there.
Well, first thing I guess, Chris, I want to say is that first thing, thanks for having me and thinking that I've got something worthwhile to share. I hope I do. Second thing I want to say is that, just to be utterly clear, there are people in the community who are far better at every aspect of business development than I am. I'm good at it, but there are people who are absolute rock stars and who are better at every element of it than I am. And so maybe the starting place for me is something I wasn't that good at, which was recognizing that it's important to maintain biz dev discipline even as your practice grows. So, first thing I'd share is that I don't know if this is still true. It's been a long time since I started my practice. It's now pushing 16 years. And when I started, there was no EOS brand. It was all new to the world, right? And there was a pattern that I experienced. I know other people experienced something like it. I don't actually know if this still happens, but for me, there was sort of a pattern of, it was really hard to get your first client. And then once you get your first one, you get the next 2 pretty quickly, and you got 3. You go, well, this is going pretty well. I got 3 clients. And then it takes a long time. There's a plateau at 3, and then it takes a while. And then all of a sudden you jump up to 7 or 8. And then there's another plateau. It's a little bit like the diagram we draw about hitting the ceiling. There's another plateau around 7 or 8. And for me, I used to describe 10 as escape velocity. That's the point where I have enough business going and I'm making enough money that this thing is, it's sustainable, and now it's just going to become sort of a growth and maintenance thing. And when I got up to 10, then that really started to work, and I got up to, I don't remember exactly, but probably somewhere around 17, and I'm starting to feel pretty comfortable and pretty confident and starting to believe that, this is good. My clients are going to refer me to their friends, and it's just going to grow from here, and that's great. And what happened was I've talked a little bit about sort of how you manage your calendar and the commitments you make and get from clients about scheduling. But I got to the end of the year, and 5 or 6 or 7 clients call me up and go, hey, this has been great. We think we're ready to graduate. So, our next session will be our last one with you. And I went from, 16 or 17 down to, 10 again. And
How did that feel?
pretty bad, actually.
Pretty bad, right?
Pretty bad.
I'm sure everyone listening can relate to that pretty bad surprise moment.
Yeah. And, but I just, I kept at it, and I kept doing what I was doing. And, along the way, I became much more efficient. And we can talk about this too. I became much more efficient in my biz dev. And at this point, I wasn't that efficient, but I kept doing what I was doing, and eventually built it back up again and got up into the high teens. And once again, it was hard work. Like I said, I wasn't that efficient, so I was a little tired. And I, again, sort of took my foot off the gas. Said, all right, once again, it's not going to, that same lightning's not going to strike twice, but it did. And honestly, I don't remember exactly what the process was, but I went from, at this point, I'm 5 or 6 years into my practice, and I went from, making pretty good money, qualifying for Freedom Forum, it's going well, et cetera, et cetera. And the next thing I know, I look around and I'm back to 9 clients. And right. So now I got to rebuild it for the 3rd time. And I got much more intentional this time. And so some of what I'll talk about, what I did and what worked for me, I became really intentional about this time. But one lesson I learned, I'd heard people say it, and I just sort of kept thinking, it's one of those, well, that lesson's true for everybody else, but maybe it's not true for me. it's one of those things. And one of the things I realized is you never stop, right? That no matter how busy you are, you always make time to stay connected to your network and to be asking clients for referrals. And and one thing I had to get comfortable with was that maybe this is a bit of a tangent. I don't think so, but one thing I had to get comfortable with was that when people made referrals to me, I felt like that was a personal referral. I felt like they were making that referral to me, and I felt obligated to take it. And when there's a point at which I realized that that might be true, but that I could refer that opportunity to somebody else and tell whoever referred it to me, hey, thanks a lot, that was great. I'm actually full right now, but I referred it to somebody who's going to take great care of them. And everybody turns out to be fine with that.
Right,
Right.
right.
And that was my own head trash, 100%. It was like as soon as I started saying that to people and going, oh, okay, that's great. Well, because one of the things I was trying to balance was when I started to feel pretty full, I kind of started to back off because I actually didn't want to get referrals that I couldn't take. And that was, so
Open and honest, because I think we've all gone through these undulations. Was part of that a little bit of scarcity mindset, as in,
sure.
sure,
Yeah,
right?
100%. I am as guilty of and susceptible to that as anybody is. So yeah, it was absolutely scarcity mindset.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, Dan Wallace, one of the smartest people I know, both in terms of intelligence and EQ, is human, right? And that's the thing. We go through these undulations, but what I think is interesting is that you said that after lightning struck a few times, you got more intentional. What did that intentionality look like?
So I remember being at QCE in probably the end of 2015 when I dropped down to 9 clients and all of a sudden it was really slow. And I was at QCE with Rip Tilden, who's one of the few implementers who predates me and who indirectly is responsible for me being here. He had introduced somebody else to EOS who introduced me to it. And I told Rip what was going on and Rip pulled up the Brian Tracy quote, which which he got from Mark Twain, eat the frog.
Okay.
You know that, right? That
I do.
if you have to, when you wake up in the morning, if sometime during your day you're going to have to eat the frog immediately because it'll make the rest of your day better. And at the very start of my EOS journey, I built a point system for myself to maintain a level of activity. And this is something sales trainers years before had taught me to do. So, I get 30 points for getting a yes. I got 15 points for getting a no from somebody. I got a point for sending somebody an email, 5 points for having a live conversation or a meeting. It just was to maintain a level of activity. What I did this time was I just said, okay, every day I'm not in a session, I'm going to be on the phone from 8 to 10 in the morning, which I think is about as much as I can physically and mentally take. So, I think, you asked me before, what was the 7:30 a.m. routine? 7:30 was just look at my contacts and figure out who I haven't talked to in a while. Now, I'm a low follow through. So there are people who are much more disciplined and systematic about this than I am.
Know thyself.
I was just looking at looking through my contacts. Haven't talked to Chris Beer in a while. I should give her a call and just spend 15 or 20 minutes kind of jotting down names. And at 8 o'clock, pick up the phone and start dialing. And
so actually picking up the phone, attempting to get human to human versus say ripping a voice note or a text, just to clarify.
Right. So, right. So not an email, not a text, but pick up the phone, dial. And what did that conversation look like? It was, was there a script with a handful of questions? Hi, how are you? I'm just calling to check in. We haven't talked in a while. What's going on? What's new? How are you doing? What's what's working well for you, in your business, in your life, and just a 5 or 10 minute conversation about that, always ending with, is there anything you need right now that I might be able to help with in your business or in your life? Some of my best bits of help I've given to people had nothing to do with their business. Every bit is valuable, right? Every bit is
Yes,
valuable.
indeed.
Right? What are you? what are the one or two or three things that you're most struggling with right now? And as they're sharing those, is there something I can do? Is there someone I can introduce them to? Is there a phone call I can make, or something I can send them that might be helpful? Just something that adds value. So what was in my mind throughout that process? I want to plant in people's minds the notion that conversation with Dan equals get value. Okay. That somehow I'm doing something that makes them go, I'm glad he called me. Right.
Simple,
It's
simple,
simple.
but
Right.
right.
And, inevitably, then at the end of that 5 or 10 minutes of conversation, they'll flip it around and they'll ask, what's going on with you? And, it's always going great. And what I learned was at all times, right now, I'm looking to add 3 clients to my practice, which is absolutely true, even if I'm trying to add 20 clients to my practice, right? Right now, I'm looking to add 3. So, if you know anybody you think might be interested in what I do, might benefit from it, this would be a really great time for me to talk to them. And, just planting those seeds. I got better and more intentional about this and about who to have those conversations with. And I'll get to that in just a second. But that's what those conversations look like. So that in that cycle, it was just 8 to 10 every day. I wasn't in a session, just have the discipline of get up, take a shower, have a cup of coffee, build a little list of people I haven't talked to in a while, and start calling them. And really, and overwhelmingly, I was calling connectors. I learned a different discipline later, which I came to actually like better, which is the 5 conversations a day discipline, which I substituted for this. And that is just 5 good quality conversations a day. And again, for me, it was, some people can do this with calls on their way to the session, calls on their way home. I really couldn't, but I found every day I'm not in a session was still enough. 5 good conversations with a client, a prospect, or referral source. And I found that if I maintain that cadence of just being out in the world, somehow things just show up in my inbox.
That's great. And I want to pull the thread of connectors in a minute, but before we jump into that, I just want to crawl around in your brain. You're having these, plus or minus 5 good conversations a day, and you're in it. You're really listening to people. You're gleaning a lot about personal and professional lives. How are you, where are you storing all of that information? Is it, and I don't care if it was on a notebook, I don't care anything. I'm just trying to think for people who are saying, wow, I collect all these good little nuggets all day long, and then they fall through my fingertips. What worked for you? Just knowing that what works for you may not work for everybody else.
So so I got answers part A and B. In terms of those conversations, open and honest, where I stored all that was up here. I get low follow through and didn't have the discipline of, and at the time I was not a CRM user, so I didn't have the discipline of like call notes. I'm pretty good, at least I'm getting old, my memory isn't what it was, but I'm pretty good at remembering, oh, the last time we talked, you mentioned XYZ. Pretty good at that, not perfect. But what this reminds me is that one habit I developed later that I thought was really good is I was a late convert to using a CRM system, and I wish I had done it from the very beginning. And the reason and the way I use the CRM system, and the one I use is HubSpot.
Okay.
But they all
Pick one, right?
Is you set up your pipeline stages, and the very first stage in my pipeline, and I share this with my 4 partners, I think we call it pre-VTH, and pre-VTH is code for heard about. So the instant I hear about an opportunity, it goes in there. I find a way to create a contact and a deal related to that thing, or maybe not even a contact. But the deal is on my deal board, and even if it's just wealth management company Chris Beer mentioned, right? Because one of the things I know happened to me is that I'd have conversations with people, and in these phone calls, somebody would say, "Oh, I know somebody who's in this kind of business, and they might be a possibility for you." And I'd hear that, and I'd make a little note somewhere, and I'd scraps of paper all over the place, and those things would fall through the cracks. And when I became disciplined about it goes into the CRM immediately, all of a sudden, nothing falls through the cracks. It's in the CRM, and there's always a task on the task list associated with it. Even if the task is, have I heard from Chris about the wealth management company? even if it's
Okay,
just,
now I'm gonna potentially call you out. You're low follow through. So how is that actually happening? How are these things happening? Do you have an accountability buddy?
yeah. So, yeah, so the process that I developed slash, was given to me, and again, I was sort of doing this with partners who were showing me the way. Is so I'm part of a firm. There are 5 expert implementers, so it's not the EOS firm model thing, but we share session space and we share some other resources. And I had a couple of partners who were already doing this, and I was looking at how well it was working for them. So I had a motivation. And the discipline that we all got to sooner or later was, one, use the CRM. Two, we hired for ourselves, we actually hired a sales admin.
Got
So,
it?
in addition to our individual admins, we had somebody who was the HubSpot expert and who just coordinated all of that stuff. For an individual implementer, you could do it yourself. You could have your assistant do it, absolutely. And then each one of us had a sales coach. We all had different sales coaches. And, one of the things I would encourage as a learning from this is don't be afraid to get yourself a sales coach. I would be happy to, connect anybody who needs one to mine, who's my dear friend, Brian McDonald. He's great. He's worked with a lot of EOS implementers.
I've worked with Brian. He's amazing.
Brian is amazing. And there are other really good people out there. So once a week, each one of us would have, and I say would have because I've stopped taking on new clients, so I'm not doing this now, but we'd have a biz dev call. On that biz dev call, I would be there, Brian would be there, my assistant Fabi would be there, and our sales assistant Casey would be there. And we'd go through my task list from last week. It's like a little level 10. What did you get done? Right? Let's go through your entire deal board and quickly discuss the status of each one and figure out what the next task is for each one. And then that became my work order for the week, was that task list. And sometime during the week, and I would have Fabi schedule me schedule a 2-hour block of biz dev time. So my biz dev activity then became maintaining the call cadence and working that task list, which would be 8 or 10 or 12 or 14 tasks. And the way I did it so that I didn't get wrapped up in spending all of my time doing things or trying to be a HubSpot expert. It's not that hard. I mean, I absolutely could have, but I would just open up an email and every time I completed a task, so 2-hour block, open email, and I would just go through my task list and I just write down what I did on each task. And I would just write it down by deal name. I didn't need to write it down, but I was checking off the tasks as I did them. Just here's what happened on each one. And it was, left voicemail, had conversation, here's what we agreed, whatever it is, need new task for this. And 2 hours of that typically was enough to get through my list. And then I put Casey's name at the top and Fabi's name in the CC field and hit send. Okay. So it was a very concentrated 2-hour block of ripping through that task list. Very efficient use of time. And that plus have the conversations, be picking up the phone and dialing. And I found that doing that, my biz dev became really efficient, very consistent. And every week or two, something pop into my inbox. Here's another opportunity. And when I got to that point, and then I won't say it was easy, but it was steady and it was not a big energy drain. And I got a little bit of feedback in that thread of those activities are horrible for me. I did it this way. Absolutely, you got to do what works for you. You have to be who you are. Don't try to be anybody else. I would characterize what I just described as sort of the baseline. It is known to work, and if I can do it, because I'm not great at this naturally, if I can do it, anybody can do it. But if something else works better for you, do that. But systematize it in some way, make it a steady, predictable cadence, and just maintain that cadence. I think that's critical. So let me just recap, for my own purposes, and maybe just to make this a little bit more clear for people who listen. Ultimately, what I found worked was the cadence of 5 good conversations a day. Conversations, not dials. Like keep going until you get people.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Use a CRM religiously, and I'm happy to share my pipeline stages, and then the weekly accountability cadence of I'm on a call with somebody, and we're gonna go through my completed tasks and my deal board. We're gonna create a new set of tasks and do that once a week, and that's anywhere from 20-minute to a 1 hour call, and then block out time. I found 2 hours once a week was enough to just rip through that list. I kind of had to psych myself up for it a little bit. I enjoyed the chase, but I kind of had to psych myself up for, got to call this person, go, why haven't I heard from you? What's going on? Right. But once I did, 2 hours, head down, no distractions, boom, 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 get a lot done. And that works, right? And then the other thing that we talked about was, as you get clients, making sure that you invite them to be referral sources.
Tell me more about how you do that.
Yeah. So, I don't think well, if there is magic to this, somebody else has the magic. I don't. I mean, I've heard people describe really interesting ways of doing this, and off the top of my head, I can't tell you what they are. But for me, it was just when a client when you have a really great session, and most of them are right, most of them are high value, is just to say to people at some point during the day, in the conclusion, whenever you find time to do it, just to say, I'm looking to add a couple of clients. My best clients come from my best clients, and what the work is like, and how the relationship works. So you're in the best possible position to know, like if this would be great for somebody. If you same line, if you know anybody who you think would enjoy learning about EOS and you might enjoy a conversation about it, I would love to meet them. And that's all I did. And I didn't, no arm twisting, no, can I follow up with you? It was just, just a reminder. And some did, some didn't, but it just added to what shows up in the inbox, right? Every now and then I get an email or a call from a client going, hey, I want to introduce you to something. Great, right? One of the things I've learned over time is that even people who are natural givers oftentimes need to be reminded.
It's a busy world.
Busy world, right? And so that's what I did in the session. It's the easiest thing to do. Nobody ever minds. And I think it helps anchoring in, like, you just had an 8-hour experience that seemed to be highly valuable to you. You don't have to say those words, right? But you can say, if you're getting value from this, and they'll be going, like, just rated this a 9.5, so I guess I am.
Good.
Right? Yeah. If you're getting value from this and you know somebody else who you think would benefit from this kind of value, it's a conversation I'd love to have, right? And they've been through the biz dev process. Like, they know, I'm not twisting anybody's arm. All I'm going to do is learn about them and offer to show them the system, right? Your clients already know that because they've been through it.
They've been through it, and they're valuing it.
Right. And they know that, I didn't twist their arm, right? So what else is of interest here? What I learned about building a good network. First, I came into this thinking I had a phenomenal network. I had been through some sales training, and the sales training was very much about, it was about build a network of people who know the kinds of people you can help, and, get to know them, let them, be helpful to them, make sure they know what you do, and just give and give and give, and they will start giving back to you. What I concluded is that is much less true than we want it to be. Maybe it's just much less true when I'm involved. That could be. Okay. Well, what I found is that, I live in Chicago, which business-wise is a pretty friendly town, and most people, it's a very networky town. At least there is a cohort of the business community in Chicago that networks, pretty aggressively, and you get into that network and you start meeting. What I concluded is that even in a community like this, which has a whole bunch of Midwest nice about it, the vast majority of people you ask to talk to, it used to be to meet in person. Now it's oftentimes it's a Zoom call, will happily do that. And they'll listen, and they'll seem like they understand what you do. And at the end of it, they'll say, wow, this is great. I might know a couple of people. I'll keep this in, they'll say the magic words, I'll keep this in mind. That's code for I'm never going to do anything. Okay? That's what it is. And that's okay. It turns out, Adam Grant, who's a psychologist and a professor at Wharton, wrote a book called Givers and Takers. And he says 25% of the population spontaneously gives without expectation of return. 50% matches, which is quid pro quo. I'll do this for you if you'll do this for me. And 25% takes, right? They take without giving back. I've had a dialogue with him about this and shared with him. He says this is what our research shows. I would say my experience says that real, actual spontaneous givers is probably closer to 5% of the population.
Wait, hold up. You talked with the Adam Grant,
With the Adam Grant, yeah.
questioning his only Dan Wallace. Okay, go ahead.
He's on LinkedIn, right? And
Okay.
and actually, it was a wonderful conversation because a guy who used to work for me wound up being his student, and so I had a little common thing. It's like, do you remember Jake? Yeah, I remember Jake. He was a rock star. So I thought he was a rock star too. So a little
Awesome.
dialogue about that. But yeah, I reached out to him and said, hey, can we chat briefly about givers and takers? And said, I just want you to know my own personal experience is that it's much closer to 5% than 25. And he says the research says 25. And I go, I totally get it. I'm a believer in research. I like things that are empirical, but that hasn't been my experience, right? And that's all I can say is, I, in some way maybe both things can be true. There is a portion of the population that gets deep psychological gratification from connecting human beings around something, right? Making connections. I recognize that pattern because I happen to be one of them. I get no credit for this, right? I didn't develop it. I didn't choose it. It chose me. And I don't know why, but I am always anxious to listen and to go, oh, I know someone you should know, right?
Well, it gives you joy. Again, it doesn't give you, say, monetary joy or things like that. It fills your cup.
Right.
And I can see where you're going with this in terms of there are people who truly live for that. They will jump through a ring of fire to make that connection.
There is, yes, there is something in some people. It's about that. And my guidance to people who are building a network is look for them. Look for them. You don't need a ton of them. I say 5 or 6. You don't need a lot of them. And one of the mistakes I made early on, really based on the sales training I had, was I networked very broadly and I offered to help first. And so every conversation I had, what do you need? Who could I introduce you to? And I'd walk away with somewhere between 3 and 8 introductions I could make for that person. And what I would get back, if I got anything, was the opportunity to meet 3 more people with whom I was going to have that same conversation. I wasn't getting introductions to business owners. So my network was growing in breadth, it was growing exponentially. And I was spending all of my time meeting other people's needs and getting gratification from it, but not getting business. And at the end of, I guess it was probably my second year, I looked back, second year, third year, second year, I looked back at that activity and asked, what's my yield been on that time? What's my return been on that investment of time? The answer was nil. I said, I can't keep doing that. So I stopped going to networking events. I stopped just taking every meeting. I became much more selective. I started telling people, if you want to introduce me to somebody, here's the profile. And the profile became first, the number one criterion is they got to be somebody who has a demonstrated track record of making revenue producing introductions to people. And it's not because I don't want to meet all those other people. It's because I don't have time. Right. And I want to be clear. I want to be clear about this, that I had wonderful conversations with people I loved meeting, I loved getting to know, and I loved helping. Right. But there came a point for me where I realized that I simply, like, monetarily, financially, I couldn't afford to keep doing that. I had to be more intentional. I'm placing no value judgment on this. I don't play and never have played the quid pro quo game. I actively discourage it. No trading. I've always told people this is what a great introduction looks like for me, and if you can do it, that's wonderful. And if you can't, right, or you don't want to, that's fine too. Tell me so I can set my expectations, but please know that if you can't make a valuable introduction for me, that's if you can't make an introduction for me that might lead to a client, that's totally okay. We'll still be friends, and I will still send people to you because I make introductions for my friends and my clients when I believe there's value. So if I meet someone I think you can help, you'll hear about it. And the only quid pro quo ish exception to that is if I know 3 people who do what you do and one of them has given me referrals, naturally I'm going to have a bias toward sending the person to them. But I have people in my network who never have and never will send me a referral, who I send clients to because I think my client needs them. The referential credibility you get, the leg up on trust when somebody hears about you from someone they know and trust, who says, I really think you should have a conversation with Chris.
It just, my mind, the mindset shifts when it's someone that I know, like, trust, respect, tells me that there is no EOS, there's no product.
You
It's,
start out with the gates down, with the shields down,
yeah.
and with a positive, sort of a neutral to favorable outlook rather than a defensive and negative one. Anyway, with that, my 3 bullet points: do what works for you, figure it out. I offered one set of options, figure out what works for you, establish a steady cadence, and never take your foot off the gas. No matter how busy you are, keep making the calls, keep doing the talks, whatever works for you, and always do it from a standpoint of genuine help first. Help, 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 help first, help second, help third.
I love it.
There you
Wise
go.
words. Dan, you're the best.